Hi Pamela, great to see a video from you and Hector, and I apologize for the delay in doing your video review. I was away at one of our big national competitions here and just got back yesterday, so I'm gonna go ahead and do your review. You had some really good notes here about feeling like the blind at the end of the weaves was going to be the best option for him, and then the rear cross was a little bit hard with the angle, which is definitely true. Quite a few dogs struggle with this type of angle of rear cross because it is such a dramatic opposing motion moment for them that they really have to understand how to continue to weave even if you are going a completely opposite direction, which a lot of dogs struggle with, especially in the beginning. There are definitely some things that we can do that make rear crossing these tight angles easier for the dogs to follow, but we will see how it was going, and I'll give you some tips on that as well. Yeah, I was just rereading your thing again, make sure I wasn't missing anything. Okay, let's go ahead and see how this went. Let me loop this. Okay. So good timing on your beginning. You can tell that you have some connection towards him. You can take a step with the dog side leg to commit to this first jump, but clearly your dog was committed to the jump because in that next frame I could actually see the dog jumping, and your timing of your front was perfect because it is done as he is taking off. So the timing is that he's prepared for that turn, he has a good idea that that jump is happening next, and you're able to move to wherever you need to be next. Now, based on your position, like the camera angle is a little bit hard to tell, but based on your position, it looks like you're pretty close to this number 2 jump, which leads me to believe on this option you're going to be going somewhere on this side of the weaves. Anytime you're going to be doing like the blind cross at the end or something like that, it's easier to start closer to 1 so you can let the dog get a little more distance from 2 to 3. If you're doing more distance on 1 and you're closer to 2, then it's going to now be easier for you to go on this side of the weaves most of the time. All right, let's see how it went. Nice. Nice weave entry, so good connection there. I would possibly decelerate a little bit sooner. Some of the dogs could use actually a little bit of a reverse spin on this number 2 because they take off for the jump, and you can see the eyes are not panning in the direction of the weaves, and it's not until the dog lands that he actually starts to turn and look at the weaves, and you can see how wide he is from those weaves as well, which helps him find the entry, but we are always looking for nice efficient lines if possible. So I would consider on this case, because it looks like you are actually going to do the blind to go to your dog walk, start yourself closer to number 1 so you can show a change in motion. So the dogs are using us as their guide as they're going through the course. If we move, they move, we slow down, they slow down. So if you start closer to number 1, you'll have some movement as he's committing to 2, and just before he takes off for 2, you can decelerate. That decelerate is going to cue some collection for him, or a soft turn, which should give a more direct line into those weave poles rather than this kind of panning line that we're getting now. The other alternative is you could start how you did, but then add in a reverse spin. Keep in mind your reverse spin should be moving in the direction of where you're going next. So you're essentially kind of spinning in this direction and then telling him weave. But our goal is that he's taking off for this jump and his head is already looking in this direction rather than somewhere over here, and that he has a mostly direct line into those weave poles. Have a beautiful job of connecting with him, which is great. And you're telling him weave the moment his paws land, which is the soonest he can start to commit. And you're already moving once you see his head is looking at the weaves, which is also great. And you're getting down that line. And the goal is to do your blind as early as you can, which you did, and then keep moving down the line. Beautiful. Yeah, in this case, it's almost like we're doing a German turn at the end of the weaves, which essentially means you're going to move all of that forward towards the dog walk. And then once you're on the opposite side of the weaves, then you're going to do your head turn. If you do it as just a traditional blind cross, then you're actually cueing a little bit of extension out of the weaves, and that's kind of what happens here, where your body is so forward. And once again, this could totally be a camera angle issue and not actually what was happening. But at this moment, seems like you're actually blocking his visual of the dog walk as he's going to be exiting these weaves. So he's coming here, and then he has to come around you for a moment, and then right here he can see the weaves, and he can see the dog walk. But you can see also, based on your position, he goes into his natural working distance, which makes him go further, so he shapes his line out further, and then he has kind of a weird approach to the dog walk and has to fix it a little bit. So how we can fix those issues is, number one, we can run it a little bit more like a German turn. So you're moving more to the dog walk, and then you're turning your head. So that's going to naturally cue more collection. Some dogs aren't quite sure how to handle that kind of pressure, though. So some of them need to learn how to finish the weaves no matter where we go. The other thing is, even if you do it as a more traditional blind cross, where you're doing the head turn and your body is more forward, so you can see how your body is forward here, whereas if you were doing it as a German turn, your body would be facing more like this, heading toes and chest facing more towards the dog walk. So that's what I mean about German turn versus blind cross. So blind cross, where usually body is kind of just forward on the current obstacle, which is what's happening now, and German turn would have your body facing more towards the dog walk. And even if you're doing it this way, your goal should be to tuck in. So you're essentially by pole 9 or 10 by the time he's finishing the weaves. So as he's finishing those weaves, the very first thing he sees is actually the dog walk rather than your leg, which will always give the dogs the best opportunity to commit to the obstacle. If we keep in mind that they can only commit to the things that they can see, it really makes a difference if we can just tuck in that extra step to the right so he can see that line. Now, he does adjust his position quite quickly, and he does have some really nice acceleration up that plank, which is awesome to see, but then a little crazy on his contact there. Silly. But that was nice. Okay, the other thing, let's see here. So you can see that when you're setting him up, he is facing directly towards you. I always try to set my dogs so that their body is facing the thing that they need to do. So if I'm going to set him up at, for example, a slice here, I'm going to set him more over in this direction, kind of off the screen. So he's really slicing that jump here. It kind of looks like he's, let me see how he moves. Yeah, okay. He does have a couple strides he has to take. So I try to set their bodies up if I'm setting them more straight on so that they are facing the jump itself. And then when I release them, I can ask them for their focus forward cue. And that makes a really big difference in the long run about how quickly and directly they go to that jump. So right now he's facing you. Dogs will tend to go where they're looking. And that's what he does. He does head towards you, and then you take that step to commit him. Make sure you're connecting with him. And you want to step with your dog side leg, but more important to the point here is that he heads towards you first, and then he has to adjust himself to actually head to that jump. And so there is a skill that you could teach him, which is a focus forward on the obstacle, which would prevent that little adjustment line he did. Or rather than teaching that skill, you could also just change how you're setting him up so his strides take him to that jump without having to do that turn away. But he does go to the jump, which is really good. A lot of times when the dogs aren't facing it, they won't go to it. So that really shows how great your obstacle focus is, that he still went to it once you added in that pressure. And then you just want to make sure you're actually stepping with the dog side leg rather than the arm. So here you can see your dog side leg is back, and you're just sending with the dog side arm, which he is moving forward. But if you step with that dog side leg, it's just a little bit more of a obvious cue for the dogs. It's more of a direct push for them. Makes it quite a bit easier for them to commit to that jump. And then as you take that step back to rotate into your front cross, it's also a more sorry, my words are getting a little jumbled. It's also a more obvious rotation for the dogs, which tends to tighten up their lines. I hope all of that makes sense. I know it was a lot. But let me pull up the focus forward thing really quick. Okay, so here is the focus forward exercise or skill or foundation. So it's essentially teaching the dogs how, when you're off to the side and they want to stare at you, how they can look forward at the obstacle rather than looking at you, and then be able to be released to take the obstacle directly. So it starts off in some small pieces, and then it works to bigger and bigger things. So the dogs are learning how they can shift their focus no matter where you are, no matter what you're standing at. If you ask them to look forward at the obstacle, they will look forward and then be released to it. Alright, sorry about that. Okay, so that is a skill that I think is a really helpful thing to teach, especially easy to teach as well. It takes maybe one jump and a small amount of space, so super great to do in the winter months or when there's snow or things like that. So just something to be thinking about. But once again, really great skill that he was able to still turn away and take that jump, which is awesome. So many dogs would go directly to the handler, so that once again shows some really great foundation training you've done with him. Your rotation is once again done before he's taking off for the jump, which is fantastic. And then you just want to make sure you keep your head towards him as you pivot away so you can see that moment that he's committing. Now this time you're moving really far ahead, which tells me that you could be doing a side change, a blind cross, a front cross to get to the other side of those weaves. And you want to make sure that you're traveling towards the weaves whether you're doing any side change, because you don't want to be moving into empty space and blocking the weaves, because if the dogs can't see the weaves, they have a much harder time committing to them. Okay, so you're totally blocking him, which makes it impossible for the dogs to get that understanding. So when you're this far ahead, I would have just gone ahead and done a front cross or a blind cross and got to the other side. If you're rear crossing the weaves, I find it's always more helpful to start closer to jump number one. So that you're letting the dog get ahead of you, and then you're just sliding behind them. But what's most important is that the dogs can actually see the obstacle you want them to commit to. So everything about your body was actually telling him to extend really far on this, and then after you told him to extend, you're telling him weave, which he can't even see the weaves. So you want to make sure that you're tucking yourself in more on this jump wing so he's landing and seeing that weave pull, and then you're going to follow him with your chest as he goes into the weaves, and you're going to drop behind and keep going. But yeah, it's a hard angle for the weaves to rear cross, so the dogs have to really understand how to independently find them, but it's even harder if they can never see them and we end up not moving. That will always make the weave pulls harder. Alright, so same idea. Make sure that you're taking a step with the dog side leg rather than just sending with the arm. So you see how you're doing a big send, but it's awkward with your feet. Step with the dog side leg and then rotate. But yeah, then move in the direction of where you're going rather than the empty space so he can actually see the weaves. What a good boy finding them. Yeah, and then you're stopping, which always makes rear crosses difficult. Okay, so one of the main features that makes the rear cross more doable for the dogs is the fact that you are consistently moving. If you have to stop and then suddenly add pressure, that will make it harder, not impossible, but harder for the dogs to do. So I found this video, it's a bit of an older video, but it's Yenny rear crossing the weaves with one of her dogs. So your goal is to let the dog pass you first as they're finding the weaves. So here she's a little bit in the dog's way, but she's keeping herself even with that pole 1-2, and she's not way out here shaping the line, because that will always make that harder if they can't see it. So even with pole 1-2 ideally, so the dog can commit, and then once the dog is committing to those weaves, she's consistently moving her feet, and then her chest is staying along the side with the dog, and she is moving to then support with the pressure. Now if your dog hasn't done regular rear crosses on the weaves, I would start there, and then I would add more dramatic angles a little bit at a time. So for example, just starting with a straight on weave and then cross the line, and see if your dog can just weave without you going all 12 poles with them to the end. And then the other thing is that then you kind of work your way around the clock. So you're able to then start a little bit more here and ask them to weave and cross behind, and then a little more here, and then so on. So they kind of get that idea that, hey, no matter where I'm moving, you can find those weaves and finish them. So sometimes it's a matter of, let me see if I can find it. Sometimes it's a matter of getting the dogs to just drive the line independently, and other times it's a matter of pre-placing a reward for them so that they can be successful. If you've taught with guides or you taught with channels, sometimes on these harder weave entries that the dogs aren't so comfortable with, I add my guides back on. Maybe I pop my poles open a little bit just to give them these great ideas of how to handle all of the different things. Let's see, I don't know if this one, there's another part of rear cross in this one. But kind of just getting the dogs the idea that no matter what you're doing, they should weave and complete the weaves and not worry about what you're doing. Let's see if I can find another rear cross version, or at least another example here before we move on. Oh, troubleshooting is always nice. So I think your main goal is to try to make sure that you are continuing to move the entire time, and then make sure that your dog can actually see the entry. And if those two things are happening and they're still struggling, then I would break the entry down into smaller pieces to ensure that the dog is successful. And you can see that they added that they have the guides on here for the beginning and the end to help the dog be successful, and I will commonly add those back in if I come across a weave pole challenge that my dog doesn't yet have the understanding of. So something to think about as well. Just think about how you taught it and then break it down from there. But yeah, the main thing is going to be staying close, following with the chest, and then dropping behind once he's entered. There you go. That's a little bit of a better angle. He's still going way out there, and then your chest is following. Nice! That's better. You kept your feet moving, and the chest was following, and you had a more direct line to the weaves. All of those things are things that will make it a lot easier for the dog to understand. I would still add something else here so that he's not going so wide, because the wide turns is wasted yardage, and when they're going somewhere where they can't see what their next obstacle is, they're certainly not going to run as quickly as they could. So things to be thinking about. Nice. Okay, so I think I've given you some things to think about for adjusting what you're doing for that rear cross, and then I would also add in practicing the blind cross and the front cross if you happen to be there, which I think you were. Every time you were way up there. So your goal with either of them is to finish your cross before he takes off for jump number 2, and then kind of guide him into that weave entry. So to kind of look, this position isn't exactly perfect, but the blind cross one, oops, I'm pressing the wrong buttons here, is going to look a little bit like this, with your chest supporting the dog going in, and then you're continuing to move. Oops, I think I have to go further back. So you're kind of doing, once you finish the blind, you're kind of doing like a running on the dog's line to help the dog find the entry, and then following through with the dog side arm to support them. So opposite arm, and then following through with the dog side arm to support them. All right, I'm going to go do your other video review now, but really good work.